Okay, so we are live, and I'm with these two great guests today. The first one that I would like to introduce to you, this is the founding member of the Conscious Capitalist Movement. Raj Sisodia is FEMSA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and Chairman, Conscious Enterprise Center at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. He's also the co-founder and former chairman of Conscious Capitalism, Inc. Raj is the author of 15 books, including the recent The Healing Organization and the upcoming Awaken the Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. Thank you for being with us, Raj.
My pleasure, Elisa.
And also Nilima Bhat, the co-author of My Cancer is Me and Shakti Leadership with Raj, founder director of Shakti Fellowship, co-convener Truth and Reconciliation and ShaktiKumbh. This project evokes candid and crucial conversations to restore gender relations with the healing power of the feminine force. The ShaktiCast is a production created by Nilima Bhat and me, Elisa Rosenthal, founder of the first and biggest female movement and institute in Brazilian real estate market, author of Proprietárias, a Ascensão da Liderança Feminina no Setor Imobiliário. And to open this conversation, I would like to address to Raj. Raj, in your latest book, The Healing Organization, we can be inspired by several examples of companies that care about the human being, the environment, and the economy. Most of them are led by men. What's the role of men to unplug the patriarchy, especially regarding companies' leadership?
Yes, so the 20 or 25 stories that we have in the Healing Organization are about companies that are, as you said, mostly led by about several, 4 or 5 women that are in there, Eileen Fisher and Tammy Simon and some others. Uh, but the men who are featured in the book are very much integrated beings. You know, they are whole in the language that you and I have used in Shakti leadership. And so they embody the healthy aspects of both the masculine and the feminine. And a number of the stories really bring that to the forefront. I think the one that does it most explicitly is probably the Jaipur rugs story, which is about Mr. N.K. Chaudhary, who is the founder and CEO of this company, which produces hand woven carpets. And there are about 40,000 women weavers working with them across India. And the reason he got into this business was basically he saw that these women were exploited under the existing system and that their lives were really terrible. They were born into this very low caste in India, many considered untouchable. They were often illiterate in those families. You know, if you're a girl born into an untouchable family, that's about the lowest status you can have. So even within their own families, they are fed last and they are educated last, if at all, and they are put to work at an early age in household work, and then soon starting to produce carpets, and then they are married off as teenagers to another weaver family, and often the husband might be an alcoholic and abusive, and they have to then cook and clean and start having children, and also make carpets because they're the primary earners because those carpets require the dexterity that women have. And so their lives are hellish and they're abused and exploited by everybody, including the contractors who come to these villages with the designs and the yarn, and they sign a contract and often don't pay them what they are owed, or they pay them late, or they will subtract half the money because there was some minor blemish, and they will also abuse them in multiple ways. So their lives are really hellish. And Mr. Chaudhary said that these are the innocents. They have never asked for anything for themselves. All they have done is serve others. He said, I want to serve the innocents. I want to serve them. I want to make their life better. So the purpose of that company really is to elevate the existence, the life, and preserve this craft, treating these women with respect and dignity, paying them well, educating them. They have a foundation that now has created reading, writing, and even basic accounting skills so that the women become entrepreneurs within this system. And their lives are completely turned around. And not only their lives, but the lives of future generations. Because I met one of these women named Shanti, and her life was as I had described it. I mean, she was on the edge of starvation many times, and now after she discovered Jaipur rugs, her life is completely turned around. And she has 5 children, and I think 2 are already graduated from college, and 2 are in college. One is in high school. I mean, these children of an illiterate woman will now all be college educated and have a different life. And when I asked her, "How do you feel about Mr. Chaudhary?" She just started crying. She said, "I don't have the words." She said, "To me, he's more than my mother and father. To me, he is God because he has given me life. I didn't have a life. Now he has given me life." And so that's the power of not only a conscious business, but a healing business, but one that includes all of the elements that we talk about, right? When we talk about the feminine, it's nurturing, it's compassionate, it's caring, it's inclusive, um, and the dramatic impact that that can have on lives is quite stark. And there's a number of stories in the book that are along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. This is a change maker, not the book, but especially the book, but the mindset that you printed on it. And Nilima, how feminism and the female movements can hold a space for those men in this transition?
I think to answer this question, let me get very, very personal with the example of Raj and myself. We met, and I told him we need to write this book, Shakti Leadership, Embracing Feminine and Masculine Power in Business. And he also realized he needs to make his own journey to his own healing. And as he came to these learnings and these practices, I think he discovered that he was um, a child of the patriarchy. He'd been traumatized by the patriarchy, right? And therefore, when Eliza, you and I started this podcast, we're calling it Patriarchy Unplugged, and essentially saying it's time to hospice the patriarchy and to midwife synarchy. The recognition that, as Raj and I talk about, the 19th century was about the end of slavery, one kind of oppression. The 20th century was the end of colonization and totalitarianism, another kind of oppression. And then the 21st century, it's really, really time to end the patriarchy because it's the kind of oppression across genders that's been happening for millennia. And Raj gave the example of Jaipur rugs, which is Rajasthan, and that is where he's from originally. He's a Rajput. And the reason we've got Raj on this call today, which is a very second call after our curtain raiser that we did last, Eliza and I, the reason we brought you here, Raj, is we want you to speak your truth as a man who was born under the patriarchy and why you understand that ending the patriarchy is not just needed by the women, but also needed by the men. And how may Shakti leadership and the work you and I have done together have enabled some of these realizations for you? So please speak to that.
Yeah, well, of course, we are all born under the patriarchy, but I was born under a particularly extreme version of it. I was born within the warrior caste in India, and then within that, the Rajput subculture, which is a very much a feudal subculture, is hyper masculine, extreme patriarchy, where the grandfather, the father, I mean, they really have tremendous power over every aspect of the lives. And they use that power not in a benign way often. I mean, some do, of course, but most of them use it in really a sort of a naked power, the exercise of power over, not power with. And so I witnessed that growing up. I was in India until I was 7 years old. Excuse me. I was living in that village until I was 5. So I have some memories of that. The uh, the amount of abuse that my grandfather would heap on the women, I mean, it was extraordinary. He would stand in the doorway and the women would literally be sitting on the ground with their heads covered. And he would just stand there for an hour just shouting obscenities at them for things that he had imagined or made up or whatever, that just accusing them of all kinds of things and just keeping them in their place. And so it was not only the women who were impacted by that. None of his sons had any real freedom. They were completely under his control, and there was absolutely no love at all in that environment. And so, within that kind of an oppressive environment, nobody can really flourish. Nobody can really grow into who they're meant to be. They're denied that oxygen, right? They're denied that sunlight. And so if I look at the story of all of his children, other than my father who escaped the village and went off to get an education, but even he was ultimately drawn back into that situation. But my other uncles, became alcoholics, became, had all kinds of drug abuse and other things, and abused the workers, and there was just tremendous suffering that was created in that system because of that energy that emanated from the top, and that has equally damaged, as I said, the men and the women. Perhaps the women more directly, you can see it, but I think the men also indirectly. And you can see that very, very starkly in my family. I think my family may be an extreme representation of that. Now, the interesting thing is that I was born to a mother who was completely the opposite. There's some women within the patriarchy and even within my own family who kind of get, they kind of become agents of the patriarchy. So I had an aunt who was like that, right? So she kind of became her own oppressor. It's kind of trickle down tyranny in a way. If you're, if you're oppressed by somebody else and you end up oppressing, it's like victims of victims. So she was very much, and this is true in many Indian families, right, where the mother-in-law kind of becomes a tyrant, and trying to keeping the daughter-in-law in line and so forth, according to the dictates of the patriarchal mindset. And so that existed, but my mother was this island of innocence within all that the ocean of darkness. And she was kind of a single mother to me for the first 7 years because my father was away. And so I was kind of raised by her as a single mother in a way, and also I probably inherited some of her traits. So I kind of had the opposite mindset from an early age. Most of my cousins and uncles were very much bred to be, patriarchs in a way, and they embodied and they sort of internalized that early on. I'll never forget the scene once that we had just come back from the US, and we had a servant who was sent from the village to work at our house in the city. And this was about a 12-year-old kid, and I was also 12. And one day he did something that he wasn't supposed to do. I forget what, but he might have sat on a chair instead of sitting on the floor. Or he might have picked up a piece of fruit and ate it. Oh, I don't know, some minor thing like that. And when my cousin in the village found out, he came to the city specifically to punish this kid, right? And he came and he dragged him out. The kid was crying. He dragged him out into the yard. He tied him with a rope to a tree. And then he proceeded to whip him in public, right? Just to teach him a lesson. And this kid's spirit was completely broken after that. I mean, he just, a few days later, he just left and, disappeared in a way. And so it just opened my eyes to the harshness of what that system was. It's not that different from slavery. And, but I had that sensitivity and also the benefit of an outsider perspective because I had lived abroad. So I could see more clearly what was being lost in that system while people were reveling in their petty privilege and power that was not earned, right? Just a function of them being born into this particular feudal system and this family. And how they all abused it, they were not stewards of the power given to them, but they were really using it to abuse people. And all of that had consequences over time. And all those consequences, we have felt deeply. So I was able to have a front row seat to the extremes of the patriarchal mindset and way of living and the consequences of that. And also over time, then becoming sensitized to what is the answer. And I think the answer really is to empower the feminine and humanize the masculine. And that's really what I think this whole conversation is about, right? That this is not about substituting men for women and having abuse, of a different kind, but really it's about elevating the feminine and empowering, giving power as justly owed. And then that combination has just so much, it's not just 1 + 1 = 2. I mean, that combination then becomes so much greater than the sum of the parts. And so ultimately, to me, it comes down to the unconditional love that my mother had, combined with the great power that my father, personal power in a way that he had, in addition to his positional power. But how can we integrate those two? But those are rarely found in the same person. But I think that is possible. Right? That's, I think, our evolutionary trajectory. If we can move towards that, so we can integrate those two things and become truly whole and powerful beings.
Yeah, this is important moment in our conversation, and Nilima, if like to address this idea for you, because for those that are listening to us right now and they are not familiarized with Shakti leadership concept, maybe could understand this is of the shallow of only gender issues, but you know that if the Shakti leadership and the things that we are discussing here are more deep and they reflected essentially in how leadership is manifested. So a recent example that happened here in Brazil regarding polarization of politics opinions. How can we evoke the Shakti leadership in such binary environment?
Thank you, Eliza. Let me again just zoom out to speak about why Shakti leadership is a possible leadership model for the world that's waiting to emerge that can work for all. Because Shakti leadership says leadership is the exercise of power to get anything done. But can you exercise true power, power that's coming from your innate core, your essence, your soul force? Can you exercise that? Because otherwise, you will exercise ego based power. And typically, it's privilege based power, patriarchal power, right? So, in order to come into your full power, you need to become a whole person. Your full power, your true power is called Shakti. And to come into that full creative soul force of the universe that flows through you, to come into that, you need to become psychologically whole. You need to become equally masculine in a healthy way and feminine in a healthy way. And the inner wedding, the sacred union of these two energies and qualities inside every person, regardless of gender, is what makes them what's called the Ardha Narishwar in Sanskrit, the half female divine, that each of us as an archetype can be equally masculine and feminine expressed in a healthy way, the androgyne. Only when we are that, in a very unique combination of healthy masculinity and healthy femininity, can we be expressing the full power that leadership needs to derive and drive the outcomes needed at this time. And if we don't have that kind of leadership, the opposite happens, which is the worst of both worlds. You don't have healthy feminine, you don't have healthy masculine. You have both expressing in this terrible, terrible, aggressive, manipulative, spiritually empty kind of way. Because the world has been living on a patriarchal culture and society for millennia now, you can diagnose the problems in the world. Look at the ecological problem. We are at a planetary crisis. Now, if you look at it in a diagnosis of do you have too much masculine energy or too much feminine energy, it's like the balance of the yin yang. Immediately you can see to restore balance, restore health, you need to return the yin yang balance. Right now, too much yang energy, too much extraction, too much exploitation of the planet as something that's inanimate, that can be taken from. Basically, the planet is the feminine, the planet is the great mother. And it's that masculine energy, the patriarchal mindset in all of us that looks at the feminine as something we can simply draw from, extract from, and ignore, But as a result, we're kind of cutting our feet, right? The very ground we stand on is disappearing from under. So even in politics, if you have too much masculine energy and not enough feminine energy, you simply have this kind of polarization, this kind of aggression, and dog eat dog world and terrible corruption. What's missing is the balancing feminine, right? Which says, make sure we are caring, make sure we are sharing, make sure all stakeholders are growing, even in the political system, that power is being distributed to the last person, right? So making sure people have their agency, their franchise, right? And they can express it without being oppressed in some way. Even at a physical health level, all of us, because we are living with our masculinity leading and our femininity suppressed, we're falling sick. There's depression, there is disease, because we end up becoming more mental beings. We forget we have a body. The mind is more masculine, the body is more feminine. We forget we have a body that we have to also take along, right? So then there is, so I mean, if I were a Chinese medicine doctor, and you came to me with a problem, any problem, social, cultural, ecological, spiritual, personal, business, you come to me with any problem, the way I diagnose the root cause is to look for the yin and the yang. And are these energies in balance? And they will be out of balance. That is why the system is sick. And you diagnose, typically at this time there will be too much yang energy and not enough yin energy, and that is a direct outcome of the patriarchal, right? A system that privileges males and all things masculine and denies females and all things feminine. And that has seeped into everything, our science, our arts, our spirituality. It has seeped into everything, and therefore we are now beginning to see the breakdown of these systems. Right? You cannot have imbalance between masculine and feminine energy. As Barry Johnson in polarity mapping and polarity thinking describes, he says it's like inhale and exhale. We need both. But if you have only been inhaling like the masculine energy and you've been refusing to exhale, which is maybe the feminine energy, you're going to be sick. And that is, inhale and exhale. Masculine and feminine are like inhale and exhale. They are not having to choose one or the other. It's a false choice. You have to have both. Right? And so we're talking about it's time to end the patriarchy, hospice it compassionately. It served its purpose, but it's now time to midwife synarchy, right? A place where there is equality between this yin and yang energies for all of us to thrive. So I'll stop there for now.
And Raj, I remember part of when you are lecturing on when you bring the example of the river and the city, that you show that very impressive image when the river comes and when passed through your city, all the fabric or the pollution, the river begins like black with all the pollution, and this yin yang very face it there in how the nature is putting this relation when we have the society, and that with this so masculinized force. How you can bring this example for us right now?
Yeah, so the image that you're referring to is actually of the area around my mother's village, where she grew up, and this is a little a city that's about 5 miles, 7 kilometers from the village, and that's where this huge, one of the major rivers of India, Chambal, comes in, and the textile plant was put there some decades ago. And you can see that downstream, the river becomes a fraction of what it was. It becomes black. The water is incapable of even having a bacterial life, forget about other kinds of life, and cannot be used for any purposes. So everything downstream, not only the river, but the surrounding lands and the health, there's cancer rates that are higher and everything you can imagine. That river is a lifeline for the agrarian people who live there. And so we accept this and we allow this to happen. It's egregious. It is outrageous. I can't believe that we have public policy that actually allows this, simply because, we're going to produce some products and produce some jobs, but at what cost? Both the air quality and the water quality there are terrible. So this is an example of the kind of decisions that we have made with a purely one-dimensional lens, which is purely about self-interest and about defining growth and life success in terms of money, right? And that's the consequence. When you do that, you end up destroying what is really important, the life-giving elements that exist out there that nature has provided us. And so we have been terrible stewards of the planet, and that is because we have operated As Lindquist said, with one wing, it's like a bird of humanity has been flying with one wing tied behind its back. And that has not only limited us, but it has also then inflicted so much damage, not only on other humans, but on all life, all other life. We are living through the fifth mass extinction in the history of this planet, and the first one that is caused primarily by human activity. And the fact is, all life is interconnected, and we don't recognize that. And ultimately, therefore, our lives are going to be dramatically impacted. As Einstein said, if the bees disappear, humans will disappear 5 years later. And that's true of many other life forms. They're all connected together. So again, we've been terrible stewards. We need to, I believe, embrace Mother Energy and Mother Earth, together. That's the way forward for us, right? We have to bring more Mother Energy into business, into politics, into our way of being, integrate healthy, the feminine, along with the healthy version of the masculine.
Yeah, companies they have a very important role in all this new relation that we are printing here with this conversation. Now in Brazil, we are discussing one company that has $8 billion debt and how this company can impact all the market in different sectors. So this is how these executives are dealing with this mentality of this new way of leadership. So being very direct to the point, Raj, how can companies help and act at this moment? And you gave one example, but if you have another example that we can bring here to our audience, I appreciate.
Sure. Well, I will start with a counter example because in the book, The Healing Organization, we actually use a Brazilian company called 3G Capital as the opposite of a healing organization. 3G Capital is run by these three men who, the last time I looked, they were worth like 20 billion, 15 billion, each. And they have grown by aggressively merging different companies together and creating these larger companies, but then aggressively cutting costs and putting the leaders on a financial incentives, heavy financial incentives. And they've created these three mega businesses. So one is in the beer sector. So it's AB InBev, which is now the largest beer conglomerate in the world. The other one is in the processed foods, which is Kraft Heinz. That was also owned by 3G Capital. And the third one is in the restaurant business, which has Burger King and Tim Horton and some others. And all of these were created. Yeah.
Just to add something, and the other one is the one that is having troubles right now. So this is from 3G Capital. This is Americanas. It's a marketplace.
That's also owned by 3G Capital?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, what they do is they acquire these companies and they immediately fire 30% of the people, 30%. They can replace the leadership team, and then they put everybody on these incredibly ambitious profitability goals. So I was working with Kraft Food when they acquired Kraft, and Kraft was on a path to becoming a conscious company. They had just done their purpose work, and then they were going to move on to the other elements and create a new culture. It was a 100-year-old company. They had signs everywhere, Kraft, born in 1913, reborn in 2013. And it was going to become a company that was relevant in the future because the kind of processed food that they make, right, Oscar Mayer, Frankfurters, and Velveeta cheese, these are not real foods. And that's what got them here, but that's not going to be part of the future. So they were ready to do that, and then they got acquired. And all the leadership team was fired. And the managers were told you have to increase profitability from 17% to 26% within 18 months. If you don't think you can do that, you raise your hands. People who didn't raise their hands were immediately fired. And then massive layoffs. And they removed all investing in the future and creating healthier food and all that. It became all about aggressively marketing what we have. So, in the short term, it goes up, right? Cost structure is cut down dramatically. You make people run you can make somebody run very fast for a short period of time, before they collapse and die. And so they did that. And then eventually, all of the consequences of those actions, you create a terrible culture. People are literally getting heart attacks. People are stressed out and burned out. They hate going to work. I mean, they're just waiting for, when they might get fired, etc. They spread a tremendous amount of suffering. Life becomes very dark when 3G Capital acquires your company. and there's nothing to look forward to. And the opposite of that is Barry Waymiller, which I wrote about in Everybody Matters, right? When Bob Chapman comes to town, you have a future, you have hope. He's acquired 126 companies and never sold a single one, never had a layoff. Same people, same business, same location. Now they're thriving, they're growing. Why? Because they put people at the center. They put life at the center, not profit at the center. And ironically, when you do that, profits grow faster over time because you're aligning all the forces together. You've got people who are inspired, who are motivated, who feel safe psychologically and emotionally. They feel satisfied and fulfilled, and they have purpose and meaning, and they do extraordinary things. Ordinary people can rise to extraordinary heights when you create those environments. And so that's a stark contrast, And I think we have to shift away from that 3G mindset, which is still the dominant mindset. Right? Business only exists to make money, and you acquire companies, you lay off people as just another cost to be minimized and so forth. And they almost bought Unilever. And that would have been a tremendous disaster because Paul Polman, has really created one of the world's more conscious companies. And there was a hostile takeover attempt by 3G Capital. They were able to resist that, But this is kind of the cancer that is eating away at society and the planet. That kind of mentality of business, and it's seen as perfectly, Warren Buffett is one of the investors in 3G Capital, for example. So on the other side, you have these companies that are being run for the benefit of all of their stakeholders. Another story that's in the book is that of FIFCO, which is a Costa Rican company, the largest company in Costa Rica, the most admired company in Costa Rica every year, the best place to work in Costa Rica year after year after year. And the CEO, Ramon Mendiola Sanchez, is always number one in terms of the most admired leaders in Costa Rica. And he has now been CEO for about 18, 19 years. And he has taken this company, which was a small, mediocre performing company that basically made soft drinks and beer and I think they had now they have some hotels and resorts as well. But over time, he has dramatically transformed this company. So first of all, he has addressed the fact that their core products are actually not that great for people, right? So the Minister of Health was telling him, you're making everybody fat here with your sugary drinks and all of that, So instead of fighting that in a political way, he basically listened and he said, yeah, that's true. So we worked with the public health people, and then they reformulated all of their products. 150 products reformulated, and they cut the sugar by 50% in their sugar drinks, and they made a lot of non-sugar drinks now. So the portfolio is very much shifted, right? And they've removed those machines from schools and so forth. They have also, on the alcohol side, they've educated people about binge drinking. Again, the minister said, there's drunk driving and so forth. So they've really changed the consumption habits of people, right? So they've done a lot of that. They've also addressed their environmental footprints in terms of carbon, in terms of water and solid waste. And they have set aggressive targets in a public way for all of those, and then they meet and exceed them. So they said, we're going to become carbon neutral and water neutral and basically take care of all of the solid waste. And now they have set another goal, we will become positive on those. So they will actually have a net positive effect. So for example, they have the world's first water positive beer. It's called Imperial, where the net effect is actually that water resources are enhanced, not depleted as a result of that. But they've also paid tremendous attention to the lives of the employees. They pay them very well, but they discovered one employee put up his hand and said, Ramon, it's amazing what you're doing, but you know that many of our colleagues here who work here are living in poverty. And he said, I didn't know, we pay well. So, but then people fall into these traps, they get some kind of high interest consumer debt. In Costa Rica, there's one thing I saw, that when you buy a motorcycle or a large TV, the interest rate that you're being charged is like 55% to finance that thing, if you pay it monthly. And a lot of people, if they are not able to pay, then suddenly they get into this spiral and they fall back into extreme poverty. So he made a commitment that we're going to get every one of those 350 families out and help them. And a large part of that was not only helping them with the immediate crisis, but then teaching them and educating them about financial literacy, about life planning, et cetera, et cetera. And they had a special program for men. They actually educated the man about what does it mean to be, a caring, responsible father and husband and so forth, and so that was a big part of the transformation that they made. So this company today is about 12 times bigger than it was when he started. It's highly profitable. It's one of the world's most admired companies in terms of what they do for the environment and for society, right? And yeah, so it's an example, I think, of a leader who has brought in. And by the way, Ramon credits his mother really for a lot of his values and the way of being a leader, right? That he has brought that heart into his leadership from that. So again, it's an example that shows all of the benefits that come when you have this kind of an integrated approach. He's very smart on the business side, good strategy and et cetera, all of that he has done, but also he has brought in the caring and the purpose and the culture and all of those elements, not only for the people who work there, but also for society and for the planet. And it's all come together beautifully.
As they say, follow your heart, but make sure to take your head along.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is it, that beautiful balance of the head and heart, that inhale and exhale. You can't have a head without a heart, the body won't function. You can't have a heart without the head, the body won't function. So, this it's a false choice that we have. If we think we can choose between masculine and feminine, it's the only solution, the only place to go is you die, right?
Yeah. And we have some examples in the world. During the World Cup, we saw several manifestations for women's rights, for example. One of them, an Iranian football player, Amir Nas Azadani, was sentenced to 26 years in jail due to his support. The process of unplugging the patriarchy could be painful and leave some scars. What are the benefits of this new moment and how we can encourage more voices to be part of it?
Yeah, that's a tremendously heroic act by the whole team. I think, especially that particular player. I think, it just shows the entrenched nature of the patriarchy in certain societies. I mean, it's not as extreme in other places, but I think Iran, Afghanistan right now are the extreme examples of that. And I do believe that the world is not adequately responding to this. You don't hear a lot of talk. You have lots of sanctions going on against Russia, deservedly so, but you don't hear the same level of commitment to change and solidarity with not only, again, the women are being oppressed, that's so obvious, but even the men in those societies, as we saw this, right? I mean, it's not like, the oppressor also suffers trauma when you do these, right? The scars are not as deep, perhaps. The oppressed certainly is more scarred and more traumatized, but the oppressors also, it's a wound to their soul. And so I think the world has to come together around this. This has to be priority number one, I believe. I really believe that all of the big challenges we face in the world, political, economic, technological, societal, and environmental, are all as a result of this imbalance. And that restoring this balance will actually, over time, solve all these problems. Because a whole-minded person is not going to hurt the planet. They're not going to hurt people, right? They're not going to, create technologies that demean our life and so forth. So it's that mindset. It's the consciousness of the wielder of power that ultimately determines the consequences of that power. And that's what I think is the number one priority that we have to have. Even in Iran, I mean, 60% of college students are women. It's a highly educated, highly intelligent. Egypt, we saw that in Egypt some years ago when they had the Arab Spring uprising in Tahrir Square. That was led by women. And I mean, the tragic thing in Egypt is went backwards. We thought we had a moment of freedom, right? And now it's a military, an Islamic dictatorship and so forth. But I think the underlying forces are there and the underlying conditions are there. And it's just a matter of determination and commitment to make this change once and for all and reach that tipping point.
I would like to build on that, Raj, to say that, as in the movie Star Wars, the second act is the Empire Strikes Back.
Right.
So when women are going to rise to seek to reclaim their agency, their rights, and to restore balance, the entrenched system that is the patriarchy currently will rise and give a tremendous pushback. So it's part of the journey. It's the heroic journey of the feminine, and the feminine all in all genders that's going on right now. It's going to be tested, and it has to come through this initiation into its full power. So we are watching this journey, and whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Iran, whether it's a female infanticides in India, whether it is girl babies being, raped in Africa, whether it is women being chopped up and thrown in the fields in Mexico. We're suddenly seeing almost like an upsurge. I mean, there were these rapes that were happening in India some years ago. Just like every day you open the newspaper and you would read some horrible rape case, right? So it's almost as if there is a collective initiation. I mean, in Shakti leadership, we say reframe your trauma as initiation. Right? What if the feminine is being initiated to awaken out of its sleeping state, the sleeping beauty state, and say, come on, you need to wake up. You need to reclaim your own power, not for your own sake, but for the whole. Because the whole is sinking without you waking up and showing up, right? Growing up and showing up. So we are at a moment in time, we're in a very historic moment for the planet and for the species. And it's the journey the species will make from adolescence to maturity. And I feel that is what we're seeing play out right now. We are living into, and we are those, I'm mixing my metaphors, but it's like the caterpillar phase is over, and we are those imaginal butterflies who have to start, imaginal cells of the butterfly, who have to come together and coalesce to create sufficient critical mass for kind of, transforming the caterpillar of humanity into the butterfly it is meant to be, right? And this seems to be part of the hero journey arc.
Yeah, I very much agree. We've been looking, all of us in our lifetimes have been living through that, right? We've been seeing the awakening of consciousness in the last few decades, which is Star Wars Episode 1, The Force Awakens. And that's been going on. And we mark 1990 as a turning point, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and, many other things. And women outnumbering men as college graduates in the US that year. We had many, many factors. I write about this elsewhere. So we had that, and now we're seeing, because so much changed in a few decades for the better, and now we're seeing that backlash, right? The empire striking back. But we have to stay true to this higher purpose of this journey, and not only the women, but the conscious men. And the episode 3 is the return of the Jedi. Right? So the Jedi are still there, preparing, and staying true. In this moment, even in capitalism, we're seeing all this thing in the US now, anti-woke, anti-ESG, and all these people saying, no, it should only be about profit maximization. They're trying. It's like the last gasp. I'm reminded of when you see certain movies and the bad guy you think is dead, right? And you turn around and suddenly he gets up again, right? The last gasp. I think we are hopefully in the throes of that phase now. Because it's everywhere. It's Korea. There's a huge anti-feminist movement going on right now, and it's just so misguided, and so. But I don't think, as I say, evolution has a trajectory. Evolution has a purpose. It has a direction. And as Martin Luther King said, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. And I think truth will prevail, and the right will be realized over time. But we have to stay true to this is not the time to give up the battle.
No, this is the purpose of this space also, to bring those conversations, to guide us and guide our listeners to this future that evokes. So thank you, Raj and Nilima, for this conversation. For those that wanna keep listening to us, they're gonna be also available in Spotify and audio platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Eliza.